Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, August 3rd, 2026. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. I wanted to invite you all to consider attending this year's Commentary Roast, our 17th or 16th. I think it's the 17th. I keep getting the number wrong. Our annual dinner at which we have hijinks, merriment, and a lot of fun roasting a prominent person in the news, in the world, in the media, in the world of business. This year's roastee is Ron Dermer, long the right-hand man to Benjamin Netanyahu, before that the right-hand man to Natan Sharansky, author, remarkable guy, fun, talkative. This is going to be a great evening. It's November 8th here in New York City. It's an expensive ticket, but if you're anywhere in the vicinity, or you want to have a great time, or you want to support commentary at our annual fundraiser, please go to commentary.org/roast for more information for the Ron Dermer roast on Sunday, November 8th. And at that roast, you will meet our panelist, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Washington Free Beacon editor Eliana Johnson. Hi, Eliana.
Hi, John.
And joining us today, our old friend, the editor of Jewish Insider, Josh Kraushaar. Hi, Josh.
Hi, John.
So it's, we constantly talk about Taco Tuesday. This was Taco Saturday. For the third time in 2 weeks, Trump threatened a massive attack on Iran coming any second, and then pulled back, claiming that Iran has agreed to the perimeters of a deal to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. I believe he meant parameters, but let's just say they might have also agreed to the perimeters. If you agree to a perimeter of a deal, it basically means you're not agreeing to a deal, since you're on the perimeter and not inside the perimeter. And so, therefore, we are in a problematic state in terms of whatever it is that he was saying. And the Iranians say they agreed to nothing, and they're making fun of him. And I don't know how you don't make fun of him at this point. He was going to destroy their civilization. That led to the first ceasefire. He was going to rain down terror on him 3 weeks ago, and then he didn't. And then 2 weeks ago, or the last week, and then he didn't. And this week, the Israelis are involved. They're going to destroy all the entire infrastructure in Iran, and they'll never recover. And it's going to be them just hell and fury. And he backed down a third time. So, I don't know what to say, except that he is making those of us who have been very supportive of the war look like fools, and so I don't really appreciate that. But it's not about me. I'm just going to say it's not about me. It's about America, America's position in the world, how America is viewed by our adversaries, and what his word is worth. So, and I think all of those are very bad and in a very bad odor. Is there a defense for what Trump is up to?
I mean, if there is, it's the same defense that, John, you said the third time or the second time in however many weeks, but it's really the umpteenth time, that he's come to the brink of something conclusive and kinetic, and then said, "Oh no, we got it. We got people want to talk. We got a new round of talks." And he's done this a billion times. If there's a defense, it's the same defense that has been dragged out each time he does this, which is Trump wants peace. He doesn't want to destroy a lot of people. He doesn't want to escalate, or or if he wants to escalate, he wants to escalate to de-escalate. That defense has failed as many times as it's been marshaled. So there's a defense rhetorically, but it's not sound. I mean, the only defense, and this is so incredibly problematic in itself, is that we may not have the defensive munitions to respond to an Iranian counter response on allies and interests in the region after a huge bombardment. And if that's the case, then we have a separate or related enormous problem on our hands.
So
Yeah, the
yeah.
reporting indicates that what happened over the weekend was that after building toward what would have been the coup de grace definitive strike on Iranian energy infrastructure, the Saudi crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, called the president and asked him to call this off. And that may have been because MBS was worried that the Iranians, in retaliation, would attack not U.S. facilities, but Saudi oil facilities and Saudi tankers. And I think that is worrisome because two things. Like, the president is broadcasting his intentions, and then he's broadcasting that other world powers can force us to call it off. We're supposed to be the world leaders.
I think
Also, there's one country
And
that is not making the calls here, and it's not not Saudi Arabia. Like, it's again to raise the point that we've raised before, but this idea that the American domestic argument around this war centers Israel, and meanwhile Israelis are waiting. Are we going to be called up? Are we going to be part of this? Like they really have to know, and they generally don't know. But the leader of the Saudis can call Trump and say, call it off. And so the skewed version that people are getting here in America is also, it's like, yet again, in similar vein to Gaza, we're watching, the American public is watching a completely different war than the one that is happening.
but look, I think that's absolutely true. And we've always consulted with our allies and taken their needs and interests into account. That's not different. But the president broadcasting the fact that we called this off because the Saudis called us and asked us to do it, and they're concerned that the Iranians may retaliate. It does suggest that Iran and not us has the deterrent power, and that appears to leave us with no place to go right now. And Abe, to your point, the umpteenth time, the Wall Street Journal editorial on this morning opens with an amusing line that the president should definitely win the Nobel Peace Prize because he's already ended the Iran war 8 times.
Josh Kraushaar, you cover this and other issues of national and international interest granularly on a daily basis in Jewish Insider, and Seth does bring up the fact that the domestic opposition to the war on the right focuses on the idea that this war is somehow in service to Israel. Israel is at the ready. We keep hearing these reports about how all this stuff on airfields, and they're staying there waiting to just get a signal if president wants Israel to go, and Israel is clearly not a determining factor here. Israel was involved in the first phase of the war, has not been in the war since the ceasefire in March, early April, and so the fact that Israel is still even being mentioned in the same breath as this war that involves the Strait of Hormuz, which is not an Israeli issue, because that's not how they supply their oil, and sort of all the kind of strategic questions about how to protect the Gulf, which are not an Israeli issue, except to the extent that they're asked to help defend or provide instructions on how to defend themselves to the friendly Abraham Accords nations like the UAE. And even Saudi Arabia, which is, of course, not a signatory to the Abraham Accords, but is a sort of secret or quiet, maybe not ally is not the right word, but a sort of working partner. And yet we're still hearing it. Like, we still see it like 3-4 times a day from the podcast bro community, that this is somehow a Israeli Jewish war that Trump is insisting on fighting, and that only J.D. Vance is standing up against this tidal wave of evil Jewish influence over Trump that led him into this cul-de-sac or, blind alley or whatever.
John, look, Israel is very sensitive to that narrative that certainly emerged in the United States in the aftermath of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's last meeting in the United States. And I will underscore that if you listen to Netanyahu's public comments and all the interviews he did with the press in the most current visit last week, he was very careful not to say this is what Israel wants. In fact, his line was essentially like, we're sharing intelligence with the Americans. We're having a conversation. There's a diplomatic path. There's a military path. There's a economic path, but we're not putting our finger on the scale for any one of those options. So, I mean, to me, that's as much a political conversation, understanding that the closeness of Trump and Netanyahu, both on the left and on the right, led to these conspiracy theories and, frankly, a lot of misinformation about who was really, calling shots during the war. As far as Trump goes, and I echo the comments made earlier. I mean, the line about that Teddy Roosevelt, said, speak softly and carry a big stick. I mean, Trump is speaking loudly and carrying a very little stick. And I think that has very serious consequences on the stage, not just for the United States, but for our allies. I mean, the biggest strength of Trump, going back to the first term when it came to foreign policy, is that he was unpredictable. That you actually, everyone had, even if you didn't like his views or didn't like his impulsivity, that you never could, your enemies would always have to be kept on guard because you never knew what he was going to do. And the reality is, I almost feel like it's Groundhog Day every week. We have the same conversation. I've literally had the same conversation talking about Iran in the pages of Jewish Insider on Fox. Like, will they, won't they? The unpredictability has become utterly predictable at this point. And Iran is not stupid. They know this game. They've called the president's bluff. And it's, I share Eliana's concerns that, it sounds like he had conversations with the Saudis and the Emiratis, and that may have led him not to go through with the planned military engagement that he was talking about this weekend. But I will say, this has been part of a pattern for John, as you said, the last few months. This has been the pattern, making big threats that he can't really execute on, and then finding a way to walk them back at the last minute. And at this point, I just don't believe a lot of the rhetoric and a lot of the posts that are coming off Truth Social and coming out of the White House. There's a credibility gap between what's being said and what's actually being done.
I am concerned about two things, one of which is that Trump may have a different scale of what it is that he thinks he can do when he calls these attacks off. And that we don't think about, we're talking about sort of the geopolitics, the geostrategy, America's position in the world for the next 25 years. And he's thinking about the next 25 hours, by which I mean, I think he thinks, oh, what's really great? I'm going to come out and I'm going to say that we're halting the war. And then Monday morning, the markets will rally. And then, look, I rallied the markets. Everyone's talking about how the economy is bad, but look what I've done over the last 6 months of this war. I have, by my machinations and feints and plays, I've managed to keep oil prices within a reasonable range, and I've managed to keep the stock market from tanking, and that he gets a surge, a frisson, right up his, sort of like the thrill up his back when the stock market opens Monday morning and it's in good shape, or oil prices don't go up or down, and they remain the same or they go down. And that may be playing a much larger role in his psychology here than the whole question of what on earth are you doing to your reputation as a world leader and to the United States' reputation as the world leader that puts its money where its mouth is. And he's like, well, I got a lot of different things going on here, and I'm saving the worldwide economy from recession. But in that case, it's like a quarterback scramble. That is to say, he decided to run this play. He called the play, which was the war, right? So he calls the play as the war, and he starts to scramble. He runs back 5 yards. He goes to the left. It looks like he's about to break through into the opponent's territory, and then they come at him, and he starts running backwards, and he runs backwards, and he runs backwards, and he's sort of around the 20-yard line, 20 yards behind the line of scrimmage, and he's running around, and they're not catching him. And then he's going to move forward, but then he runs back, and it's all him. He's in the backfield. He hasn't gone into sort of like enemy territory, and he's the one who called the play to begin with. So if we're still alive and we haven't been tackled and haven't lost the war, he's still nonetheless somebody who like started this thing without any clear sense of what it was going to mean to finish it. Because I think he thought, I'll scramble, I'll break through the line, I'll go 2 yards back, and then I'll run forward and I'll go into the end zone. And then it turned out that was not the way the play was going to go.
Can I make a comparison? When I was a kid, I had
comparison? Okay, it's not a hockey.
No. I'm gonna stick with football since you brought football.
Okay.
When I was a kid, we had these tapes of blooper reels, and my favorite was the Jets years ago had tried a one of those forever lateral plays on a kickoff at the end of the game, right? You're down and you don't have time to actually stop and snap the ball. So you try to run it back for a touchdown, and that means you're just like throwing it to each other and laddering or whatever. This play is amazing, and the NFL Films guys put really great music behind it. And after a while, you almost don't really know which direction everybody is going in and supposed to going in. But it obviously doesn't work, but it goes on and on and on. And it was so legendary that other coaches actually had the league make copies of the film for them, because it was like the greatest attempt at a West Coast we've ever. And the stats were that the Jets had covered more yardage on that play than they had in the game. But a lot of that yardage is backwards. That's how I feel it is with Trump. He's looking at the final numbers and going, oh, we covered 160 yards on one play. And really, that's because he runs 80 yards back and then forward and then flips the ball to the Vance core and then back to Trump. And then Trump tosses it to the Rubio team, and they tried. There is no like underlying structure here, but that is what it feels like.
I'm frightened, frankly, because I don't. The degree to which, if we take Abe's initial point, which is, what if we've run out of munitions? And I heard on NPR on Friday something like that the number that is being bandied about is that we have 800 Patriots left, and that that's it. That's it. That we have 800 Patriots left. First of all, I don't want to know that number. It's bad that I even heard that number. And second, if we had 2,000 Patriots and then we used 1,200 of them and we have 800 left, we knew we had 2,000 Patriots and only 2,000 Patriots when the war began, and he shouldn't have started the war. If we don't have sufficient munitions to fight a war that's going to last more than 2 weeks, we shouldn't have started the war. So if this is true, and I don't know if it's true is the point, I find that, Kane, Admiral Cooper, General Kane and all that, would they have been so positive about this? Or is it just like, yes, sir, if you want to go to war, we'll go to war for you. We'll do our level best. And then nobody could bring him bad news. So nobody was telling him after 2 weeks, man, we've gone through twice as many Patriots as we expected. And so we got to at that point, you got to ramp up the war. Like, you got to make it harder and tough. That's when you have to start hitting Carg Island and stuff like that, because you're running out of the munitions you need to keep this going over a year. And that's where the TACO stuff starts coming in. He started a war and was unwilling to fight the war that he started by getting it over with sooner, because he was dealing with the daily phenomenon of the markets, the oil shock, the stock market, the fact that the public thinks the economy is bad, and his numbers were going south. But it does really bring up this question about whether or not he's the only person who would know, he and like 5 people, whether or not this war was practical or practicable. And I assumed that it was practicable, and now I'm sort of getting to the point where I assume that it wasn't practicable, and that absent a complete regime collapse after the first day of strikes, we were just in this territory where we were going to inevitably end up at this point.
Yeah, I think, this is why Trump riding high on what happened in Venezuela on the, 24-hour or whatever it was, 48-hour operation to extract from Maduro, believed that, I don't know if he believed it would be that quick, but clearly he had thought this was going to be a historically short, successful war. And he was prepared only for that. There must have been some team inside of advisors who reassured him of that. I don't know to what degree there was dissent on this point, but whatever it was, that's what he went with. And after a certain date, he was done. And for him, he thought it was practicable because he figured we had enough for that short month-long war. And here we are. And, something else strikes me about this, to Eliana's point about the U.S. It's like we are the only big power making moves that I don't believe right now, whose bluff is worth calling right now. Iran, they're not letting go of the strait. They're sticking to their threats, right? Putin's still throwing Russians into the meat grinder in Ukraine, I have no reason to doubt that, say, China still has designs on Taiwan. It's the U.S. that keeps now coming to the brink and then, bluffing. And that is terrible because we've got this geopolitical, geostrategic situation where all these bad actors are not bluffing.
Josh, Trump tweeted this morning, or truthed, or whatever the hell you want to call it. My real polling numbers, not those made up by the fake news media, are the best they've ever been. And why wouldn't they be, with the biggest tax cuts and employment numbers ever? The biggest outside investment in American and world history, a totally secure border, a giant victory in Venezuela, the denuclearization of Iran, unparalleled respect and success throughout the world, and much more. Don't believe the radical left's fake poll numbers. So I'm reading this, and it goes to the psychology question. Is he saying this cynically and consciously with the idea of rallying his base to say, don't believe what you're hearing? Like, don't believe what you're hearing. We've denuclearized it. Or is he living in a world of complete and total delusion? Because we know that he is now polling at the worst level, and we're talking about aggregate polling, of any president since George W. Bush in early 2008.
Yeah,
like,
he has a base problem. I mean, the polling overall is job approval. If you take the average of the best polls, it's mid to upper 30s. We're nearing W. Bush, Katrina the territory, and that was when you started to see Republicans jumping off the ship, and you're already starting to see that. Now, granted, folks like John Cornyn, Bill Cassidy, Tom Tillis have no political skin in the game because they're retiring. They're not going to be on the ballot in November. But this is what you see when your numbers are in. I always say actions speak a lot louder than polls. Well, you see these type of actions from your own members of your own party when your numbers are getting to the point where they are. I also wanted to kind of address Abe's point, and just I think this ties together with Trump's psychology and why the Iran war hasn't gone according to, I think, where Trump was at. You do see the February war being compared to Venezuela, the short, sweet, in and out. And I think that certainly was what was on Trump's mind when he initiated the conflict. But I mean, to me, the 2025 dropping of the bunker busters against Iran's nuclear program, that is much more akin to a short and sweet. I mean, take the victory and then then recalibrate on where things are. That's much more in the Trump style. When you take out the leadership of a country, I don't know how you don't game out the fact that it's going to take a long time because you're declaring war and they're going to have to fight back, and it's going to be in all likelihood very, very long and drawn out, and you need the supplies that are necessary to fight that war. But it beggars belief that a lot of these kind of planning situations weren't kind of fully thought out, because as you said, if the munitions were as low as now we're hearing from press reports, and if Trump also was not willing to commit ground troops, and that's another. I mean, well, what wars are fought without ground troops? I mean, if you're not willing to go to that level like our enemies are, then you're probably not going to win when you play this out in the long term. So, I mean, to me, the success of the 12-day war was much more consistent with the kind of the Venezuela strike, go in, go out, achieve a foreign policy objective. It doesn't seem like, even if that's what was on Trump's mind at the time, it doesn't seem consistent with a lot of the characteristics of the Venezuela operation.
I feel like we've seen an almost unparalleled month in the modern presidency here, because we not only have this going on with Iran, we have the Senate revolt against the nomination of Todd Blanche to be Attorney General. That is a Senate revolt, basically, of two Republican senators, two that you mentioned, Cornyn and Tillis, saying that they will block Blanche's confirmation if Blanche and Trump don't commit to ending this so-called weaponization fund, this weird multi-billion-dollar payout kind of, I don't know what you would call it, like a payout pile of money that Trump and others will get as a settlement from the Justice Department for pursuing them unjustly as a result of political pressures in the Biden administration, something that is outside of all understandings of presidential power and all of that. You got that happening on one side. You've got the collapse of the case that the reflecting pools resurfacing was destroyed by sabotage. In Jeanine Pirro, one of his most slavish supporters, functioning as the U.S. Attorney for the acting U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, dropping the case against this ex-Olympian for supposedly destroying the reflecting pool, and saying that based on all the evidence, the reflecting pool's resurfacing had been done incompetently. And we also know that the reflecting pool's resurfacing was done on a no-bid basis with a very odd guy who clearly there's some shenanigans there. And he is just like nothing looks good. Like nothing looks good, even from the most slavish Republican perspective. Nothing is looking good for him. And here we are, it's August. We have 3 months until Election Day. And it's like, can he put the wheels back on? I mean, can he win the war in Iran? Can he straighten the ship? Can he stop doing these crazy half-assed things and help Republicans move forward? Or are we just beyond this? This is who he is. He's 80 years old. Yesterday he announced that he had won the Bedminster Golf Club tournament with a score of 70. I don't even believe that. I mean, maybe he did, maybe he didn't, maybe he mulliganed. I don't, who knows? But if you see him saying he's honored to have won the golf tournament at the age of 80, I'm going to be skeptical that he won the golf tournament at the age of 80. There's nothing that he says now.
It's like watching Putin practice with the hockey team, and he had the national Russian hockey team. There's always one image of him getting a breakaway and scoring on a goalie. Was the goalie trying his hardest? I don't really believe it.
Yeah.
I mean, these are all self-inflicted problems in totally self-inflicted problems. The Tillis and Cornyn and the guy in the other guy. There's one other one.
Cassidy?
Who is-
Not Cassidy.
Yeah, Cassidy.
Yeah.
Cassidy. The opposition in the Senate is created by Trump, unwilling to brook dissension in his own party, and that's created this set of confirmation problems for him, the Blanche confirmation problem and others. That's one set of problems separate and apart from candidates who are reluctant to appear with him because who will be reluctant to appear with him because of his sinking approval numbers. And the war is a different problem, and I think one that is a failure of imagination on the part of his team, which is this is a different type of I hate to even use the term, but it's a different type of drawn out and forever war that's created disaffection, dissatisfaction, and opposition from the people who are not, I think, the people he was afraid of brooking criticism of forever wars from. Now, it's not the type of forever war that's creating mass casualties, lost limbs, PTSD, and those sorts of things, but it's a type of low, simmering conflict that is constantly in the headlines and that is creating opposition from people who are supporters of American leadership, a muscular American foreign policy, and who, probably represent the majority view, not only within the Republican Party, we know that for sure, but within the country, who don't like to see the headlines that an American strike was called off because the president got a phone call from the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. And I think that's something unexpected. And the third thing I would say is it is a declaration of war to drop a bunker buster on Iran. That's war. And it was surprising at the time that Iran didn't retaliate. I think it was a strategic decision by them to mislead the president about what their capabilities were. And he certainly should have expected retaliation when he went in for seconds this time. But I think it misled him into believing that their aspirations to be a dominant regional player, that they had set those aside. And what they're moving towards now is a demonstration that they want to, not only do they want to survive, they want to be a dominant player in the region, not necessarily, as they did before, by building a nuke in the immediate term, but by controlling the geography. And they're doing that quite successfully. The question really in my mind, and sorry to go on, is the president playing the quote unquote, forever war game or low simmering war game just to get through November because the markets are of importance and he will make a more definitive moves, on November 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th? Or is he really spooked by this? And I don't think any of us knows the answer to this question.
I know the answer to one part of this question, which is that even if that is the strategy, it's demented because he will only lose power and authority and force and the ability to work his will the longer this goes on, and particularly if the midterm elections go the wrong way, by which I mean if the midterm elections go the wrong way, the Republican Party has been standing behind him. If they lose the House and Senate, now they probably won't lose the Senate, but if they lose the House and Senate, how the Republican Party feels about him in the House will be of no moment whatsoever. But secondly, it's going to be every man for himself. It's like, okay, we stood behind you for 2 years. You and your cronies billions of dollars are somehow flowing into yours and Witkoff's and Lutnick's and your kids' pockets from crypto and this and that, and the reflecting pool, and you tore down the ball. We're taking all this water on for you, and you have taken our power away. You've humiliated us. We're lined up with you. You have a 30% approval rating. Go to hell. You're done. And we're running in the other direction.
You are starting to see Republicans come out and express opposition to the strategy on the Iran war. Tim Sheehy in Montana has been relatively outspoken, and they're not naming the president, but they are saying that they think the strategy is somewhat misguided. Tom Cotton in Arkansas is saying the same sorts of things. And I think you're right about the course after the midterms. And I'm not that confident about their ability to retain the Senate. I think it's a real toss-up. Right now, we're seeing.
We should talk about that. Why don't we move on to that? Because Josh, this is part of your this is a big bailiwick of yours, right?
Yeah, I think two things that are worth talking about, and John, obviously chime in if there are other things. I think that polls in Texas are concerning, and we're seeing a drumbeat among Republicans that say Texas can't go red. But those polls are close. And the same in Ohio, where the candidate is little known nationally. And again, Trump's decision, his decision to endorse Paxton over Cornyn. Paxton may have run anyway, but that's a difficult race that Republicans have to pour money and resources in, finite money and resources into now, as well as Ohio. And we don't quite know about Maine.
And Iowa. And
Iowa, I think, is a red state where Republicans are likelier to win. But again, they've got to spend resources there.
Yeah.
Ohio's red too, but
no,
but
Ohio's red.
Challenging terrain.
Yeah, right. Ohio's red, but the point here is that Democrats are making it a race everywhere that a race is conceivable.
Yes.
Now that everything may go back to homeostasis, and you could end up Iowa, Republicans winning Ohio by 4 and winning Iowa by 9, just because of the general homeostatic nature of American partisan and ideological politics. But you could also see how the conditions of 2026 are uniquely favorable to unexpected reversals in that we're not in homeostasis. In fact, we are in disruptive territory.
If I can add some crushing morosity to the tie between the foreign policy and the politics. Look, I actually think this is the height of Trump's foreign policy powers. If Democrats take the House, which I think is very likely, not guaranteed, but I'd say 95% chance, you're going to have oversight. You're going to have, Democrats are going to have a platform to challenge much more effectively what Trump is doing in Iran. You're going to have the politics very much play out in the platform of a presidential campaign coming up in 2028, and you have J.D. Vance waiting in the wings on the Republican side if he seeks the presidential nomination. So, I think the closer you get to 2028, it's actually going to be, this is the time. If you want to win the war, if you want to actually do some kinetic action to actually change the realities on the ground, this is the time to do it. After November, and Trump is learning that, by the way, with the whole issue with the attorney general. He first said that, I'll wait till November and appoint Blanche as an interim AG and wait till Tillis and Cornyn leave the Senate. Well, those seats Cornyn's seat could flip, and certainly the Tillis seat could flip. And I think he realized the math is not going to get any easier because Democrats are going to win some of these seats. So, going to the politics on the Senate, I agree with Eliana. I think laid it out really nicely. My big question, and I may be a little more bullish on the Senate map for Republicans because it'll take a sizable wave for Democrats with all their own problems and their ideological direction to win states that have been reliably Republican and have gone for Trump by over double digits, 11 points in Ohio and even more in all the other battlegrounds that Democrats are trying to pick up. So I think on the Senate side, I know we'll be discussing the divisions and the issues with the Democratic Party, but the rise of the socialist left on the Democratic Party may not affect their ability to win the House and may not affect their ability to win a lot of seats. But what it will have an impact on is winning Ohio, Iowa, Texas, Alaska. I mean, though you have to, if you're the Democrats, you pretty much have to win at least 2 of those, maybe 3, to win the Senate majority. And I have a hard time, once these campaigns get underway, seeing how a party that's really catered to the left wing isn't going to have issues winning over those rock-ribbed Republican voters. They'll need a flip.
They might lose Michigan.
Who?
The Democrats might lose they might lose some ground.
Right. Well, okay, so let's get to that. So tomorrow night is the primary in Michigan between Haley Stevens and Abdul El Sayed. Obviously, a matter of immense moment, and there's an interesting question if you are like a partisan Republican and an ideological conservative, which is on the one hand, if Mike Rogers, the Republican candidate, could pick up Michigan, that gets pretty close to holding the Senate for Republican. I mean, Democrats would have to win an really unexpected seat, or like run the table everywhere else, and even places that they shouldn't necessarily win, to get there. And so, hey, let Abdul El Sayed win. Like, don't be so upset if he wins. He's an easier target for Rogers, but you do not want to hope that Abdul El Sayed wins tomorrow night. I don't care. First of all, he has a significant chance of winning. It's not that it's a lead pipe cinch that Rogers wins that race. The polling right now has Rogers up 3 or 4 over Sayed. It doesn't have him up 15. It doesn't have him up 10. It has Rogers has Stevens beating Rogers by 3 or 4 points. But the earthquake that would be represented by an actual Hamasnik whose leading supporter is his father-in-law, who is an unindicted co-conspirator in Hamas funding cases, getting into the Senate is a history-altering moment in American
And his sister
politics.
is out spitting at cops outside ICE facilities, and is a Hamasnik at the University of Chicago. I mean, this is, all in the family, truly.
Right.
The key with El Sayed is that he is focused on the Democratic Party and changing the Democratic Party, as are plenty of other Democrats. But he doesn't, I don't know if he knows who Mike Rogers is. He doesn't seem to be paying attention to the Republican Party. And that's, as I wrote the other day, that's not saying he doesn't want to win. Of course he wants to win, because success is the way to remake the Democratic Party in the image that he wants it to follow. He wants the incentives to change, and for people to know that you can run screeching about AIPAC 10 times a day, noun, verb, AIPAC, and Jewish money, and win the Democratic Party. That's the first thing he says, because that's why in the leaked audio in his Zoom with donors last week or the week before, the comments that had been made public that he called John Fetterman an ogre and said, you put an ogre on a pike, as a sort of warning sign that will affect the way people view the power of AIPAC and other groups in the primaries. He is concerned about what Democrats say and what they have to say, what he feels they have to say to get elected. It's all about this internal party. So him winning if El Sayed wins tomorrow night, that is a massive victory for a lot of genuinely terrible people.
Look, it's not just him, right? So that's the Israel. We have a specific issue with the Israel component, but Francesca Hong.
Well, also Hassan Piker. He's one of the guys who has had Hassan Piker front and center, and Piker is, aside from the Jew stuff, as we say, also a guy who likes to take trips to China and hold up Mao's, aged copies of Mao's Little Red Book or whatever. So
yeah, but so we have the Israel stuff, and then we have the radical leftist stuff, but we also have a very likely statewide. I think it's now a foregone conclusion that Francesca Hong is going to win the gubernatorial primary in Wisconsin. She is as far left as he. We had the victory in Iowa of Kiros. We have We have essentially
East Colorado.
Colorado.
Malak,
I'm sorry, Malak Yuros. We have obviously the swapping of one DSA person for another in Maine, having run the regular Democrat out of the race, Graham Plattner giving way to Troy Jackson. We have a national wave of state level and local level takeovers of regular Democratic seats by DSA people who have two qualities, one of which is that they are uniquely loathsome or loathers of the Jewish state and anti-Zionist and believe the Jewish state shouldn't exist. And the other is, that they are basically anti-American, like openly anti-American. They support China. They take trips they talk about America as though it's a great evil from 1619 onward and all of that. And effectively that takeover has already happened. Even if they don't win in November, the fact that all this energy among Democratic rank and file primary voters has has been an accelerant to them is an amazing fact.
What makes these elections this week so consequential is that they're not taking place in deep blue districts, which is where all the other primary DSA successes have taken place in New York City and Denver and Philadelphia. These are among the deepest blue socialist friendly parts of the map. This is a statewide battleground, Michigan. Wisconsin even more so, John, because it's a governor's race. You're actually running the state. Usually, even at a time when people will go to the further left or further right in a congressional primary, because a lot of people view Congress as something of a debating society, so they just want to send a message. This is your state's governor, who's actually the top chief executive, and Democrats are about to nominate Francesca Hong in a landslide election. Not the sitting governor in both states, by the way, Whitmer in Michigan and Evers in Wisconsin. They've endorsed the more moderate candidate, and it's had no or little effect frankly, to my surprise in Michigan. So this is a sea change. It's a lot of Democrats I've talked to have described it as a virus in the system where, it starts at the very far left district, like the one in New York City. But because there hasn't been a sustained pushback from party leaders, it just grows and grows and grows. And now you're seeing even in, states and swing districts, the Democratic Party has been taken over, or at least a very sizable faction has been taken over by this radical DSA group. And I think the most politically effective, this is what you're going to see in November when you have Mike Rogers go up against potentially El Sayed and the Wisconsin race, where you have Tom Tiffany as the likely Republican nominee. We're obviously focused on anti-Semitism, Israel. It's crazy to look at the DSA platform and see that these are the views that these folks espouse. But they also want to abolish, according to the DSA platform, abolish police, abolish prisons, end borders, and this is why the power. I was on Fox News Sunday when Shannon Bream read that list of the DSA platform to the co-chair of the national DSA. And it didn't just go viral in conservative media. It went viral in liberal media because this stuff is so insane. So the key in Michigan for El Sayed, it's not the anti-Semitic. It's crazy that he is palling around with Hassan Piker, that he won't condemn a Hezbollah terrorist attack. It's just insane. But the stuff that's going to be the most politically salient for your swing voters is going to be the other stuff that and El Sayed, by the way, has been on record in the recent past as supporting defund the police as well. So there's a whole lot there. The question is, for the Republicans, can they litigate this effectively? Because Democrats sure as heck haven't been able to do that.
It's funny
before Evers, three of the past four pre-Evers governors in Wisconsin were Republicans. So it's just like a key point to make for people is that Wisconsin very often has Republican governors, not just moderate Democrats. It's this is not like this is not a state where you can just, it's not a state where it would be shocking, like when Chris Christie won in New Jersey and it was like, oh, this is a big, Wisconsin is not a, we think of it as we think of Madison and we think of all of the progressive energy in and around Madison and all that stuff. But statewide is a very different picture, and Republicans would be salivating at running against somebody like that in Wisconsin.
But that's
Josh,
the danger. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, Josh, I agree with you to an extent. I agree with you that in our circles, the hatred of Israel and the hatred of American supporters of Israel, all al-Sayed talks about, his only response to any challenge is AIPAC, and you're a tool of AIPAC, and AIPAC this and AIPAC that, which the average Michigan voter, I doubt, really knows what AIPAC is, and $46 million from AIPAC and this, that, and the other is not the most important issue, and is not salient for the average voter. But I do think his proximity and the proximity of a lot of these candidates to Islamism and his embrace of Islamism, his father-in-law's enmeshment with it, his sister's enmeshment with it, I do think that's politically salient, and I don't think voters will abide that. And I think it's an important issue if he's the candidate for Mike Rogers to run on, to press him about, for reporters. I mean, good luck, but for reporters to press him about, for journalists to investigate, because that's something that I think it's just like defund the Pentagon and defund the police and open the borders. Voters don't like that. It's un-American.
Right.
In the same way these other things are.
If this were a presidential year and the entire electorate were going to turn out. Now, granted, midterm elections now are much more popularly attended than they were the earlier decades of my life, right? There were 120 million people voted in the 2018 midterms, which was like the biggest number percentage-wise in 100 years. But if the entire electorate were voting, these guys would be toast. But remember, it's going to be 60% of that probably, or less. And these enthusiasm numbers are what tells. Democrats are not quite twice as enthusiastic about voting, but something like 33 to 40% more enthusiastic about voting in November than Republicans. And that's where a Hong can beat Tiffany. That's where al-Sayed can beat Rogers. Because if Republicans don't turn out with the same passion as Democrats, these guys can win. If the entire state were deciding, really, as would happen in a presidential year, they probably wouldn't. Can they in this atmosphere, particularly with everything that I laid out about where things are going wrong for Trump? Yeah, they can. That's why it's so important that Haley Stevens wins tomorrow night, because you just don't want to take that risk. Not that we have anything to say about it. I'm saying that existentially, you don't actually want to test this. You
Can I just
do not
make
want
one?
to yeah.
I agree with you,
Yeah.
and I've been surprised by the number of Republicans who I've heard saying, "Oh, we'd much rather run against al-Sayed. It's better." But the amazing thing, and this underscores Josh's point about the takeover of the Democratic Party, is Haley Stevens is asked about, do you think al-Sayed's an anti-Semite? She says yes, and then she's asked, are you going to endorse him in the general election? She says, oh, yeah, I'm on the team.
Yeah, that used to be right. If you said to somebody, is al-Sayed a racist? And they said yes, and you say, do you endorse him? And she says yes, that would be an oceanic moment in media coverage. Open racist, support for someone you say is a race, that is not acceptable, but it is apparently acceptable to say about someone you say is an anti-Semite, and so that's again another sea change.
I just have a thought on this issue of which is the more sort of salient line of attack, going after their crazy socialism or going after their Islamist ties. I think that the question is almost academic because the problem, I think, is that like you can't get a critical mass of people to believe either one. There are all these voters, liberal Democratic voters who are not socialists, who are not in their hearts friendly to Islamism, who don't really accept that these candidates want to destroy the Senate or abolish, the Supreme Court, or that they have genuine Islamist sympathies or ties or histories with them. It's just like they view it as the distortion of that the Republicans have distorted a much milder position, and they're not going to fall for the right-wing propaganda on these candidates.
I just
Which
want to
is
propose.
why I think it's important for candidates to point out that we've actually run this experiment. We've had left-wing district attorneys who, when people saw the results of, abolish bail, go light on crime, people in the most left-wing cities in the country, in San Francisco, have been horrified by what they've seen. Chesa Boudin was tossed out on his tuchus because people were horrified. And San Francisco now has a centrist, happens to be Jewish, mayor who is reversing all of these policies. And that's happened in many, many places. We actually do know what this looks like in practice. And people have not been happy with it. And I don't think it's unfair in the least. And in fact, I think it's essential for these candidates to point to show images of, to marshal the statistics of what's happened. When, it's not the prisons were abolished. They did that in a much lighter way. And the results were horrific.
I just want to propose this as a thought experiment. One of the things that's happening here is that the logic of the political positions in the air on the liberal left are being crystallized by the DSA. In other words, you're not for abolishing the police or abolishing prisons as a normal Democrat, but you accept that the country was born in racist, and you accept that justice is unequal, and that black people and Hispanic people are sort of treated worse by cops and by the system, and you accept all of this, but still, you're not a crazy, so prisons are good and cops are good. Except then you have people who say, okay, well, if you believe X, Y, and Z as your predicate, then you should probably put your money where your mouth is and say we should abolish prisons and abolish the police and abolish ICE and do all that. And that is more attractive to voters than people realize, because it suggests a seriousness of purpose that whatever. Let's go on and have things go. If you think that the country is on the wrong track and you think that things are going wrong and something fundamentally unjust is happening in the country, the people who say, I agree with you, something fundamentally is unjust in the country, and I have some pretty serious measures and steps I want to take to address that, as opposed to you're right, everything is terrible, but we're just going to go along with the status quo because changing the status quo is too dangerous. If the electorate is more in the let's disrupt mode, then the disruptors look more attractive. It's just a fact of life. There was a point at which Rick Perry, the very popular governor of Texas, was calling for the abolition. By the way, interestingly, given the DSA's stance on the Senate, wanted to end or reverse the constitutional amendment that led to the direct election of senators. That was a position he took in his manifesto that he published as he was thinking of running for president in 2012. Meaning, then Republicans were in the, hey, let's go to first principles. You know what hasn't worked? direct election of senators. We should get rid of that. That's crazy. That's what on earth was he talking about? But conservative magazines had come up with this idea that that was bad, or one man, one vote is better than the undemocratic nature of the Senate. All kinds of weird things were being proposed on the right in 2010, and there was nonetheless this wave. Now, some of it went too far, so that those four famous Republican candidates for Senate, O'Donnell, Murdaugh, Aiken, and Angle, were tossed out, didn't win because they were too extreme. And that would be the analog in this election year to El Sayed and Jackson and whoever else in the states, maybe Hong or whatever. It's like, no, that's really too far. But in general, we go for change. We're going for change, and the more change, the better.
We also have a real life example just in the last few months about what Democrats would tolerate in Maine, where first Graham Plattner, we learned he had the neo-Nazi tattoo. The party didn't care. Then we learned he watched Hamas videos and cheered for Hamas. Didn't matter. And then we learned he was a sexual abuser, and not really a whole lot of people cared. It wasn't until the rape out. I mean, it wasn't until, and even when the New York Times story, it was softened and it didn't. So the partisan instinct is I totally agree with your comments earlier, John, that you're gambling, you're playing with fire if you think El Sayed can't win a Michigan general election. He's going to cost them some points. But in a wave election where Democrats across the board are doing quite well, and the desire, as we've talked about, for, throw the bums out, anti-establishment, like nothing really matters, like he's certainly very much in play, and the polls suggest it. Polling shows he's losing about 5 points. There was a gold standard poll that came out this weekend. El Sayed, I think, is down by 3 points against Rogers, whereas Stevens wins by a couple points. But that's not a huge gap. And, and I've seen enough elections, like in my home state of Virginia, we just elected an attorney general who was revealed to have fantasized about committing violence against his political enemies. And he lost a lot of points on the margins, but he still won the election against a very down the road, middle of the road incumbent attorney general. So the reality is we're very partisan, that this stuff doesn't matter as much. And that doesn't matter whether it's ideological, but Israel, but you're going to pay a penalty, but the penalty isn't as much as it's been in not the distant past where this was disqualifying stuff.
We've been going an hour, so we have to stop. And the funny part is, and it's not funny at all, but it's interesting, is that when I got in touch with Josh to ask him to come on today, my thought was we were going to spend this entire program talking about the meteoric rise. I didn't think it could be meteoric, but over the last 2 weeks in openly anti-Semitic acts of violence here and abroad, and we haven't even gotten to that topic, but I'm talking about the beating of this teenage kid in Rome, the firebombing of a kosher restaurant in Montreal over the weekend, the defacing of the statue of Maimonides in Cordoba, a bunch of other things that happened last week. It is now almost a daily action that cancellation of a book book launch in the home city of Nashville of a writer who has written a book called White Blonde Jew. The bookstore, on the grounds that its followers were going to protest and make a scene, and this is like her local bookshop that she's gone to her entire life, or at least as long as she's been an adult in Nashville. I mean, just on and over and over and over again. And politics and the things have moved so quickly that we couldn't even get to this. But Josh, I did want to give you a chance just to ask you whether you're feeling, as somebody who commissions pieces on this particular stuff like every day, the extent to which you are feeling amazingly an acceleration, because one would have thought that it couldn't accelerate much faster. But are you feeling an acceleration?
Look, I will say that there has been such an acceleration since October 7th that there have been these spasms of anti-Semitic harassment, violence, assault, that they don't seem all that abnormal these days. I mean, I think the thing that we're seeing a real shift in is the politics in the United States. I would have said maybe a year ago, John, that the Canadian situation where you just have synagogues under assault, people being abused. I mean, that was happening here, but it was happening at a greater level and greater rate in Canada, and their politics were far worse in terms of the left in Canada and the lack of responsiveness from their liberal leadership in the country. The thing that kind of alarms me, as we've been talking about these last few minutes about Michigan and about these, swings, the mainstream Democrats totally throwing in with accepting and accommodating the DSA. That's what we've seen in England with Corbyn. That's what we've seen in Canada more recently. That is, to me, the more crushing morosity of the situation. That we have been admirably with Democrat, Republican, across the board for the most part. The government responses have been, condemning anti-Semitism, acting to fight the scourge, even if it hasn't been all that effective at times. But now that with Mamdani's election, that kind of opened a Pandora's box, and we're seeing the endpoint or the acceleration, as you talk about it, John, that we now have a Michigan, we're on the verge of having a nominee in Michigan that is openly anti-Zionist and has said anti-Semitic things, and that you have other candidates that are following suit in the Democratic Party.
Okay, I want to make a quick recommendation and go totally non-political here. I was in Maine this weekend. And I went to one of my favorite places in America, and I want to heartily recommend the place and what I did there. That is the Ogunquit Playhouse. The Ogunquit Playhouse has been in Ogunquit, Maine, since 1932, or maybe a little earlier than 1932. So early that, in fact, one of its earliest players was Betty Davis, before she became a huge star in Hollywood. And the Ogunquit Playhouse, it calls itself the foremost summer theater in America. It is a delightful, wonderful, uniquely American institution. And they are staging right now and will be for another 3 weeks, the best unknown Broadway musical of the last 50 years, which is City of Angels, which won 6 Tonys in 1990 or something like that. Very difficult show to stage, a musical that is partially about Hollywood in the 1940s and at the same time a film noir, a detective mystery. It's about the story of the writer of a book, of a mystery novel, and it tells that story and the story of the writer in Hollywood getting screwed by the studio as he tries to write the screenplay to the novel. And it's a very complex, visually complex show, delightful, hilarious, one of the great all-time Broadway scores by Cy Coleman, incredibly witty book by Larry Gelbart, incredibly witty lyrics by David Zippel, and performed by this astounding cast of major American talent, and directed by someone named Hunter Foster, who is a Broadway star, who has lately become a director, whom I saw stage a production of Sondheim's Little Night Music 2 years ago that was brilliantly staged. And this is even more brilliantly staged. And if you are anywhere near Ogunquit, Maine, or if you're in Boston, if you're in Connecticut, if you're anywhere in New England, and you have a chance in the next 2 weeks to go see City of Angels at the Ogunquit Playhouse, trust me, you should do this. And this is one of these wonderful local American institutions that burrows itself in, has stayed there, has a mandate to provide the best in entertainment, American entertainment, to an American audience, and it is spectacular. So that's City of Angels at the Ogunquit Playhouse, directed by Hunter Foster. An amazing show, an amazing place, a wonderful place to go in the summer. We'll leave it there. So Josh Kraushaar, everybody follow Jewish Insider, next to the Free Beacon, my favorite online source of all things morose, and aside from commentary and the Free Beacon. Anyway, subscribe to the newsletter, subscribe in general. Every day.
And we had the revelation that the Kamala campaign feared the Jewish Insider morning newsletter. So if you want to get a part of what presidential candidates wake up in the morning fearing, it's Josh.
There you go. Right. So anyway, an absolutely central American publication. So Josh, thanks for coming on. And for Eliana, Seth, and Abe, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.